Hello and welcome to episode 93 of the Synergen Leadership Podcast. For those of you who are listening for the first time, my name is Julian Carl and I'm the CEO and the co-founder of Synergen Group. I'm passionate about all things leadership and management, so passionate in fact that I decided to start a podcast about it. And here we are in season 2, and my purpose for the podcast continues to be the same, to raise the standard of leadership. In today's show, I speak with Greg Smith, who is the author of Career Conversations, How to Get the Best from Your Talent Pool. Early in his career, he realised our motivations and behaviours often determine the way in which we work with others, the way we lead, and whether or not we reach our career potential. This led him to complete his Masters in Career Development in 2006, and he also later assisted Edith Cowan University in delivering that particular program. Over a long and varied leadership career, he's benefited from several major career transitions. This includes leading large international trading businesses at CEO level, followed by leading various consulting businesses, and finally, co-founding and leading Deliberate Practice, a HR consulting firm, as managing partner and CEO. Greg's extensive experience and strong track record of successfully shaping and driving business turnarounds, together with his expertise in career development, executive coaching and mentoring, allows him to assist leaders to enhance their effectiveness and career satisfaction. He is also accredited in theoretical and applied aspects of solution-focused coaching from the Coaching Psychology Unit at the University of Sydney. He is a professional member of the Career Development Association of Australia and a Certified Practising Marketer and Fellow of the Australian Marketing Institute. Now, during the course of the conversation, we explore his book in detail. I start off by asking Greg, why did he decide to write this book? We speak about the new career reality and how we can reinvent ourselves. We discuss the importance of personal brand and the value of networking. And I finish up the interview by asking Greg about how we lead career conversations and why a written plan is so important. So keep listening. As always, really like to hear your thoughts about the interview with Greg Smith, author of Career Conversations, How to Get the Best from Your Talent Pool.
Welcome to the Synergen Leadership Podcast with Julian Carl. Julian returns in 2019 with weekly conversations with leaders and authors from Australia and around the world, giving you the opportunity to share in their journey and learn from their expertise and knowledge. Julian also shares some of the tools and techniques he uses as a leader, mentor, and facilitator, helping you to build your leadership capability and improve your confidence as a leader.
Welcome, Greg, to the Synergen Leadership Podcast. Really appreciate you actually taking the time to come out to Synergen HQ and be a guest so that the listeners have a bit of an idea of who you are. Who is Greg Smith?
Well, thanks very much, Julian. It's great to be here. I guess in the first instance, careers and leadership have always really fascinated me, and over the course of my entire career, and I spent 20 years running companies for organisations like Amcor and North and others, and then spent another 20 years in consulting, and mainly around career management, leadership, that kind of thing. And then decided in 2010 with a business partner to start our own HR consulting business, Deliberate Practice. So I co-founded that with Peter Bowen and was the CEO and managing partner of that for a number of years, and now have sold out of that business, but still collaborate with the team down at Deliberate Practice and do my own executive coaching work, where I really like to help aspiring leaders and experienced leaders become better leaders and more particularly incorporate the career capability or holding career conversations capability into their everyday leadership routine. So that's my real focus for today, for my work today, my consulting work today.
So we're here to talk about your book, Career Conversations, How to Get the Best from Your Talent Pool, and published by Wiley. Why did you decide to write this book?
Well, over the time, particularly the consulting work, Julian, I think brought a real focus for me that many leaders really struggled with holding even basic career conversations with their employees, and in some cases would do almost anything to avoid them, and they ended up being add-ons in performance reviews or a little career chat. But today, I don't think a little career chat along the way will cut it. So the other thing that struck me was it's not that difficult. So leaders do all sorts of really complex things, and I kind of thought, well, it's not that hard, and I really wanted to write an easy to read, really practical book about how to go about the rudiments of it, because as I said, it's not that hard. And I particularly didn't want to write an academic style book. I've been an academic, so I know what that looks like. It was really to write a book that was going to be something that leaders could pick up, read, get the rudiments of it pretty quickly, and implement straight away. Not having to spend days in workshops or anything like that. They could just pick the book up and go run with it straight away.
Okay. So I want to start off with a bit of an excerpt from the introduction. I believe everyone has a right to career satisfaction, which is a fundamental source of energy, creativity, and capability. Yeah. For many, however, career satisfaction can be as elusive as self-esteem. That said, when career harmony does exist, problems of the greatest complexity seem to be solved more quickly and easily. The positive impact on our lives is palpable and exciting. The payoff, better career conversations, can therefore be remarkable. In my experience, many leaders are fearful of confronting the lack of career satisfaction and its consequences, preferring to ignore the realities that surround them. Despite all that has been written and said about employees as free agents, I continue to be amazed at just how many leaders still feel ill-equipped and reluctant to have meaningful career conversations with their employees. So the reason that resonated with me is in the work that we do, I'm noticing more and more organisations don't necessarily have the support structures in place for leaders to perform at their peak. And when I read that, it really made me think that supports that idea. So why do you think that organisations aren't giving their leaders the capability and the frameworks to be able to have these career conversations?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Julian, and there's probably many reasons why that hasn't happened. And in some ways, I think it's the way that professional development has evolved. And I think today, careers, whilst the whole notion of you've got to manage your own career has been around for a long time now, and everyone gets that, not many actually know how to do it. Some just do it innately. They don't need any help at all. They just, go off and seem to put their careers together in a very successful way. But that's not everyone, and many people have found need help doing it. So I think it's kind of an evolutionary thing, and that's now coming of age. There's some sort of maturity happening with careers. So perhaps if I could give you an example to contrast that, if you look at executive coaching, that sort of arose in Australia in the 90s and many years before that in the US. But in the 90s, executive coaching was really seen for people who were the organisation's problem children, more than that kind of thing. And then the idea evolved to being actually, no, this is really fundamental to an executive's development. In fact, almost today, well, haven't you got a coach? Doesn't your organisation value you? And yet back in the 90s, it was sort of for the organisation's problem children. And that the whole aspect of executive coaching arose from the 90s to now through the work of a lot of people who were very prolific in both the academic side and the practical side of it, like Dr. Anthony Grant and many others who've really pushed very successfully profile what executive coaching can do. So that's an example of an evolutionary process that's ended up being today, where we just, you must have, surely you've got a coach. And I think the same thing, funnily enough, even though careers has a lot longer history, I think in a funny sort of way, careers has found itself in the same place today, largely through the growth in technology. And there's all this emphasis on soft skills and, we need to think about our careers because the robots are coming and all that kind of thing. But what it has done has brought a focus to careers in a way that we've never had before. And then, in turn, what that's brought a focus to is, well, who's going to deliver that career support? Does the organisation go off and hire them a career coach from somewhere, or do they do something else? Or, more particularly, should that come from their leader, which is what I'm advocating here, that it shouldn't be something that is separate or something that HR does or something we delegate off to anyone. As a leader, I don't know why the heck you wouldn't want to be talking to your people. And a career conversation is the best way I know, or one of the best ways I know, of building trust and a connection with your team, which goes to then which can help them at a time maybe when they need your help the most as a leader. So it's not a case of delegating it off. It's a case of saying, this is really important for my leadership skill, my suite of skills, and it's a really important activity that I really want to be doing. And I think that's the key is you've got to genuinely want to do it and genuinely have an interest in people's development. And to me, leadership is without doubt, one of the fundamental aspects of it without doubt is being able to build capability. And then that goes to retention and engagement. And we all know there's lots and lots of research about that in terms of what it does for organisational success and the success of individuals.
So I want to start digging deep into the book, because I think there's a lot of really important stuff here that I'd like to share with the listeners. And you start by talking about the need to move from this old career model to the new career model.
Yeah.
What's this new career model? What should our listeners be thinking about?
To do that, I probably have to talk about the old model just very briefly, which goes back to the last century. And Donald Super, one of the prolific career researchers of his time, he mapped out pretty well the old career model, where there was a series of career stages you went through, but it was very much a linear pathway. It was something that our grandfathers would have followed, and it would start with a fantasy stage, and this is where boys thought of becoming policemen and firemen, and girls thought of becoming ballerinas and nurses. And you've got to, for the listeners, just remember that this was another era. But that said, that wasn't too far from the truth back then, last century. So, and then you go through the next stage of a growth, an establishment phase. So do I stay at school or do I go into work? And then you move into perhaps into a job, and through maybe through advancement for some, certainly maintenance, and then through to disengagement. Donald Super called it decline, which was effectively retirement. So it was very much a linear pathway, and the kind of mantra of the day was, find a really good company, look after it, find a really good job in a really good company and look after it, and kind of stay there forever. That was the idea, and that was fantastic for a while, for many years. And then in the 90s, we had this terrific downsizing, particularly in Australia, in that the 91 recession really hit hard in Australia and actually played a key role in changing the mindset of people about jobs for life. The Generation X at the time saw their parents losing their jobs after 40 years in some cases, and said, right, well, I'm not going to let that happen to me. I'm going to be in charge of my own career. I'm going to be a free agent, and I'm going to run my career the way I want, and not be at the mercy of a cycle like that. And that took us right into the noughties then. And then we started seeing this recycling of careers happen. And this is what I'd call the new model now. So in some ways, there's some of the same stages of what Donald Super identified in the last century, but except hopefully more enlightened. But what we more see now is a recycling effect of some of those stages. And, it might be 3, 4, 5 times in someone's career now that's anticipated, and many more jobs. So basically the old model was linear, straight line, very much structured. Today, it's more of a recycled approach through many, many different cycles, which is just terrific, unless you don't know how to do it. And that's where, again, I come back to it's a really fantastic opportunity now for leaders to hop in there with their employees and actually help them navigate that pathway, because I think with the advances in technology, that's coming at us like a tsunami of change right now. And with that, the growth of AI and automation, the gig economy is already, that's not even futuristic, that is here and now. The gig and sharing economies are really reshaping the career landscape. So that's feeding this whole recycling piece. So there's a need to think about how we're going to manage that, how we're going to move from one career to another. How do we transition that? And is it just going to be by luck, or is it going to be by chance, or is it going to be more of a structured approach? And what sort of tools do I need as an employee? And more particularly in the context of the book is, as a leader, how can I actually help them? And that can be challenging for leaders, because it might be that whilst we talk about retention, it might be that having the career discussion is about actually helping them join a new organisation. And that can be challenging for some leaders to think about in that way. But it may be that absolutely the best thing for the person to leave the organisation. And as a leader, it's your responsibility, if that's what's going to be best for them, to actually help them do that and at least get the benefit of their experience and skills while you've got them. And they might actually come back to you at some later stage down the track. But I think this will be the new paradigm and moving forward. And I think it's already there now, but I think we'll see this really grow and increase, particularly over the next few years and certainly over the next decade.
What is you also talk about the new career reality?
Yeah.
Is that, explain that for the listeners.
Okay, so the new career reality is really what I've just been talking about in the context. What I'm thinking about there is the impact of technology particularly. It's just inescapable, where routine tasks will be done by machines, and the more cognitive functions will be performed by humans. So that's a really great opportunity for human beings. It's a natural place to add value, rather than doing just repetitive tasks that a machine can do. And then, of course, the gig and the sharing economy. But Deloitte's published a study in May this year, and they predicted in that 2/3 of jobs will be soft skill intensive by 2030, and 86% of jobs created between now and 2030 will be knowledge worker roles. So there's some pretty stunning statistics, and there's lots of other studies that tend to point. It's not just Deloitte's report. There's lots of other studies that tend to point in the same direction as that, and I think this is helping to shape the new career reality. So what you've got to make sure is that the light at the end of the tunnel, isn't an oncoming train.
So I'm personally a big fan of frameworks, models, and tools. I really do think that they allow people to take a theory or a concept and apply it in a real practical sense.
Cool.
So pretty much straight off the bat, you introduce a model which you call the career leadership levers model.
Yeah.
Are you able to sort of, as much as possible in an audio format, sort of
describe it? Yeah,
explain what that is to the listeners.
Like you, Julian, I like to have some visuals, which can't be seen here, but I'll do my best to describe them. But I do like to have a visual about what's available to you as a leader, so you can grab hold of the concept quickly. So what I identified was basically 4 areas. One was as levers: self-insight and goal setting, deep listening and connectivity, emotional or stress control and motivation, and reframing and communication. So they were the 4 levers. And what I've shown diagrammatically is those 4 levers then feeding into 4 quadrants that are the vehicles by which you might use those levers. So in the case of self-insight and goal setting, that's going to feed vision and goal setting. So that's which is quite crucial, because this is where we find meaning. And careers themselves are really important to us because they facilitate socialization and they provide meaning in our lives. in both our professional and personal lives. In terms of deep listening and connectivity, if there was one aspect of today that I would encourage all listeners to focus on, and particularly if they're a leader, or even if they're not a leader, is deep listening, or listening per se. No matter how good your listening skills are, I think that's a lifelong journey of improving it. That's why I don't like to scale listening like on a scale of 1 to 5. How good are you? Because if you say 4, then you kind of think, well, I'm nearly there. I'm pretty almost as good as I can be. And yet I think that no matter how great a listener you are now, it's worthwhile to be on that journey of just being a better listener, improving your listening skills, and particularly deep listening, which is really where I'm connected with you. So the way I like to think about listening is on 4 levels. So it's cosmetic listening, which is kind of looks as though I'm listening, but I'm not. Conversational listening is, yes, I'm listening, but I'm only listening to the extent of waiting for you to finish talking so I can have my say. And then active listening, which is, we're getting the right territory there. So active listening, I'm taking notes, might be in a lecture theatre, or perhaps I'm a juror in a courtroom. And then there's deep listening, and this is where I'm actually really tuned into you. I'm aware of your verbal and non-verbal cues. I'm aware of your animation. And this kind of thing is really important when you're working with someone in their careers, to see not just what they're saying to you, but what their level of animation is, which points to their motivation and how excited they are about what they're talking about. I've worked with many people, and they'll be telling their story, and you can tell exactly when they're talking about a period in their life that wasn't exactly the best fun compared to that's fun. It's just by watching their body language. They sit up and they're animated, and they're telling their story using their hands, as opposed to their shoulders sort of slumped down. So being highly attuned to that is really key, but it's actually quite hard work. It's quite hard work. Some of my colleagues who do this, they'll be deep listening with me, and I say, oh, for goodness sake, cut it out, like I'm exhausted. So you can't be in deep listening mode all the time, because it can be quite exhausting. Obviously, being able to control your emotions and manage your emotions is really, really quite crucial in this, and a way of helping others to do the same. So that's where emotional intelligence comes in, and gets wrapped up in your ability to help others manage their emotional and their stress control as well. And I think the way I like to think about emotional intelligence, put simply, whilst there's been, the research goes way back to the 90s with Marion Salovani, and then Daniel Goleman popularised it in the mid-90s. Whilst there's been so much researched and written about, the way I like to think of it is just simply, how to make sure your emotions don't stop you achieving your goals. It's as simple as that. But I think it does tend to wrap up beautifully the communication skills you need as a manager, whether it's to do with either the social competences or the personal competencies you need in emotional intelligence. And then there's reframing and thinking, and I like to, for me, the solution focused notion is a really important part of that, and it's one of the most powerful communication tools. I was introduced to it in the early noughties. I wish I'd known about it 20 years earlier. So powerfully, the power of it lies in its simplicity. So incredibly simple and if you can help others think in the same way, then that's a really important thing, I think, benefit that leaders can bring.
You talk about this idea of the art of reinvention. So what are we reinventing?
Well, I think in terms of what I was saying about that recycling ourselves through different career stages, Julian, I think that that's in this world, particularly with the way the employment market's reshaping, with new jobs emerging and old jobs, other jobs becoming redundant. In fact, I was reading again about the organisations that producing this manufactured a machine called Hadrian X. Fascinating to read that. I'm sure if your listeners have come across it, but it's a bricklaying machine, and they're saying that this machine will lay 1,000 bricks in an hour, which would take 2 people 2 days without meal breaks to lay the same number of bricks, according to this organisation. So, that's just one example. We've seen, the automotive industry deal with automation for years now, and the effects of that, what's happened there. But I think that the way the economy is reshaping with careers, and particularly around the direction of where we're going to be adding value, which is a natural place for us to add value, is in the human interaction space. So machines will do everything else. We don't need humans to do that, and we can allow them to be innovative and creative and add value that way. So I think that's going to change the nature of jobs quite a bit. It already is, which means we need to reinvent ourselves. And to do that, then we need to know, well, firstly, what does that look like? And then secondly, how do we go about it? And one of the big, really fundamental pieces in reinventing ourselves is understanding our transferable skills. It's not rocket science. It's quite easy in a sense to, we're talking about, things like leadership and teamwork and collaboration and innovation, creativity. For instance, they are all of those skills are transferable, where we can take it from career to career to career, and particularly if they're humanistic ones. So, for instance, with machines, there's no point trying to compete with machines. Just absolutely no point at all. In fact, we don't even know how the brain thinks. We still don't know how the brain thinks and reasons, but that's a natural place for us to be. I was listening to an expert talking about this just recently, and they said that they saw AI and automation as being a function of risk and probability. So, if a machine could visually see a cup, it would say, well, with all that's programmed into me, I've got a 99% certainty it's a cup. That's how it works, yeah. Which is fine. And this person was explaining that it really resonated with me, because they said, well, if you're producing an algorithm to diagnose cancer, you would want it to be really, really, really accurate. However, they said if you were writing an algorithm to sort out the black jelly beans from every other colour, then, well, it'll do that, but it was kind of got it 80% right. Doesn't really matter. So it was about relative risk and probability. Whereas with humans, it's all about that humanistic side and building empathy and rapport. Which machines, it doesn't matter how well the algorithm's written, it's just never going to do it.
Chapter 4, you start by this idea of building career and self-insight.
Mm.
So why is that such an important aspect of?
Yeah, well, look, I put it in this book because in the context of when I wrote this for leaders was really around, I called the chapter Fit Your Own Must First, and it was really about, for leaders, understanding themselves first. Now, we know this in any sort of leadership program. It's, being comfortable in your own skin. We've all been fed a diet of that sort of stuff, and it's great. It's very true. And the same is true for careers as well. So understanding yourself is the very, very first place to start, because that's where you'll unlock all the answers to your direction. Often when we don't know what we want to do next, it's because we don't know some of our key drivers. And when you unlock those, then some of those decisions become much clearer. You get clarity can come a lot clearer from that. So, and we're talking about, there's some key ones. Obviously, you need to know your skills. And when I talk about skills, I'm thinking certainly transferable skills, but I'm also thinking about the ones I want to use. So not just the ones I can do. So, for instance, I think I'm pretty good at analysis, but I really hate doing it. And so I don't tell people, because if they know, they then get me doing it. So it's not just about the skills we've got, but the ones that we really love using. And there's some skills that I've got that I just prefer not to use at all. And then there's career drivers, which is really in another way talks about motivators. You know what we and they're found in our values. So these are the key motivators that are going to they're going to provide us satisfaction. And in the book, there's a survey there's 9 key drivers, but you probably need at least 4 of the top 4 satisfied, or you're going to find it hard to be really satisfied in your career. And of course, your attributes and your personality and your cognitive makeup, just understanding what's important for you.
You reference a tool which I'm a big fan of, which is the SWOT.
Yeah.
So when I come across other leaders and thought leaders who use some of the same tools, I'm always curious about their take on it. So why do you think that is such a useful tool for leaders?
Yeah, great question. I think it's just such a simple analysis to do. That's you can kind of do it on the back of an envelope almost, but it's a way of organising your thinking. And where I really want to focus on more is the strengths and opportunities. You know, it's great to focus on. I'm not saying you should ignore your weaknesses, but having a conversation about amplifying someone's strengths is far more engaging than talking about how lousy I am at something. But that said, it is worthwhile, and I think in a personal sense, it is good to sit down and think about, well, where are the opportunities sitting? What are my strengths? And what could come in as an exocet missile to put me off my course? So I think the SWOT analysis, whilst it's conventionally more used in business strategy, I thought it was just a natural place to do it personally, because I could see all the same fundamentals applying. You know, if you were, and it's also having a way to put your radar up for what's coming down the funnel. You know, if you're on the earth, if you're on a ship, for instance, in the 1700s, and you're up the mast watching for the cannonball to arrive, you know, if the cannonball is, you're only going to see the cannonball up the mast when it's just about to hit the ship, and there's nothing much left to do except jump off. Whereas if you can have your radar up so that you could see the Exocet missile was launched, you know, say an hour ago, you've got time to perhaps manoeuvre the ship. So it's all about having that advance warning stuff. And I think particularly with what's happening with technology and careers and reshaping the market, whether we're individuals or we're organisations, we have to have a mind to what's going on, and you can work it out. There are some things that you won't necessarily be able to predict, but there's a lot that you probably can. And the better you can be prepared, the better you can be, the better position you're in to take advantage of the opportunity.
You ask a question which I am always fascinated by the answers that I get, because I sometimes ask this question myself. And you ask the readers to consider, well, what's their personal brand?
Yeah.
How are you finding leaders are responding to this idea of personal brand? Because my experience is that they're not really putting the focus on it. I think they should be. And they almost think that it's not for them, it's for someone else to determine. Mm. So what's your view on it all?
Well, I think it's absolutely critical. Like usual, absolutely critical. And similarly, I think that perhaps there's not the focus that there should be on it. We all understand in business branding, you know, marketing brands or a business brand, no one needs convincing about the power of that. And yet when it comes to us, there seems to be some other measure for some around the nature of branding. And sometimes I think some people feel quite awkward about putting themselves forward, or perhaps it's just that sort of nice modesty of, you know, I don't want to put myself out there too much. But it's not very helpful when you're thinking about your career. So personal branding is absolutely fundamental. And the reality is we've all got a brand, whether we know it or not. We've all got a brand. The only question is, are you managing it, or is it managing you? And that's why I say about social media, for instance, an incredibly powerful tool. We all know that. We still don't really know social media can do. But already it's having a massive impact around the world. And yet, but yeah, you've got to be really careful about how you use it too. We've seen plenty of that. You put something in cyberspace, it's there forever. Talk to some politicians who put up something, 20 years ago, and it comes back to haunt them.
So, it just happened, didn't it, with the Canadian Prime Minister?
That's right, Justin Trudeau.
Yeah,
exactly right. So you've got to be really careful about how you manage your brand. The experts will tell you in business land, you've got there's something negative goes out in social media about your product, you've probably got 2 or 3 hours to respond. That's how quick it is before it does really big damage to your brand. And I think in the same way for your personal branding, you've got to be really careful and try and manage it as tightly as you can about what's out there. And because the question is perception reality? Is your perception of your brand the actual reality that's out there? And if it isn't, what are you going to do about it? And how do you manage that?
Also talk about mentors. So obviously I'm a big believer in mentor. My first book was about mentoring. So I'm curious, why do you suggest that mentors can help?
Coaching's more a facilitative process, a collaborative facilitative process. So the coach would provide the coaching framework will be asking questions more than anything else. And the ability to ask the right questions lies in their skill of the coach. I always say, you never know one of my favourite sayings is you never know the question you've asked until you've heard the answer to it. But in contrast with mentoring, coaching conjures up in my mind, an athlete with a coach observing a top athlete with a stopwatch in their hand. Whereas mentoring, you've got to get this image of an old man with a long beard and robes and sandals. Yeah, and but I think that's the right sort of imagery, because mentoring is about someone who's walked in your shoes, someone metaphorically older and wiser who can provide advice. So, this is, yes, I've struck this situation before and this is how I go about it. And, in my view, really great mentors are also coaches, but they're actually really hard to find. It's really hard to find a mentor who's also a really great coach. And sometimes in the engagement, you might flip from one to the other. You might go out of coaching mode into mentoring mode, and really skilled mentors who are also great coaches know how to do this. But mentoring is really fundamental, and I think in ideally the mentor would know about your industry, and ideally would know about your company, but not necessarily, but ideally they would. Whereas coaching, you don't need to know anything about the person's industry. You don't need to know anything about their company or anything like that. It's because the skill lies in the process, whereas mentoring is really providing advice based on experience. And they're quite fundamental difference, but really powerful. And I think an individual should, in my view, have both a coach and a mentor, because they play quite different roles, unless you're lucky enough to have one who can do both, but they're rare.
The goal of goal setting. I was interested in this because, what we know is that it's important to be clear about your goals, but there's so many different approaches to goal setting. So I was curious to get your views on it.
Well, in the spirit of solution focus, I like to keep it simple, and as simple as it can be, which I think was what Einstein once said: "Keep it simple, but no more simpler than it has to be." Look, I think I really like Tony Grant's approach to goal setting, and he's got a book called Solution Focused Coaching. Solution Focused Coaching. So Anthony Grant and Jane Green wrote that book, and they in that he sets out a very simple model, but effective one, of setting a goal, developing an action plan from it, acting, monitoring, then evaluating. Obviously, if it's successful, then it's complete. And if it's not, then change what's not working and go through the process again in a continuous sort of feedback loop. And of course, having goals as being SMART goals, so specific, measurable, attractive, realistic, and time frame. Now, that's been around for a long time, but I frankly can't find anything better to use myself than making sure they're SMART. But I think for some people, it's not so much in the process, but it's how they think about goals. So some people, you're right to focus on this, Julian, because in my experience, some people have a lot of trouble setting goals, and whilst others have too many goals. They get goal diffused. They've got so many goals, nothing ever gets done because they're too goal diffused. But I think setting goals does need some encouragement sometimes. Some people can be anxious about setting goals, and it's a really great place as the leader to actually help them do that. But if you have a structured approach, you've got a follow-up mechanism so to help them stay on track. Because most people can, if they can set a goal, then the next challenge for them will be to stay on track. If it's, for instance, an example that comes to mind would be weight loss. If you set a weight loss and say, well, I'm going to lose 10 kilos, and then, maybe that's over 3 months. So there's your goal. You're going to lose 10 kilos over 3 months. And then 3 weeks in, you go out for a big dinner. You say, oh, that's it. The diet's over. But can be quite tricky sometimes just staying on track instead of just saying, no, well, a dinner out's not going to make any difference. I'll get back on track tomorrow. So I think it's about setting goals, but then holding the coach or their leader the opportunities to help them stay focused on their goal. And as I said, the model that Tony Grant and Jan Green have got in that in solution-focused coaching, I think provides a really, really nice little model that shows exactly how to do that.
Also talk about this skill-will matrix, which are useful ways to lead and coach. And this wasn't one that I had come across before, so I want to know about it.
Again, it's a great little heuristic about that really means if you can work out which quadrant you're in. We've got 4 of them. There's guide, delegate, excite, and direct, and they're all a function of either high or low skill or high and low will. And then you can kind of get a bit of a mud map of what to do if you end up with, whichever quadrant you end up with. So if you were in the bottom left quadrant, which is direct, so this is where there's in the person low skill and low will, then the first thing to do is you might want to check out, well, what's going on? Why have you got low skill or low will? And identify the motivations, and then build will and skill. So it's quite simple. And you want to, in that case, foster small steps. So, you might be making big leaps, but any small steps you want to be celebrating. If you then looked at the top right quadrant, which is around delegating, so this is almost the sweet spot, if you might say that. So the person has high will, they're really motivated, and they're highly skilled. So it's kind of leave them alone in that case. If you're coaching them, is give them the space to do their own thing, and provide discretion for them for self-direction, and just provide the support and resources as they need it, rather than perhaps in the diametrically opposite, where you had low will and low skill, where you're going to have to pay far more attention and be more directive. So that's really the model. It's a great little heuristic. Really works. I've used it lots of times to figure out what I'm going to do next with a coachee. But it helps them uncover their motivations and move forward. And you can. It's also a great way of framing solution-focused questions, and helping them with picking up on unrealised patterns or behaviours.
Talk a little bit deeper about that solutions focus, because you've mentioned it a couple of times, and it's something which I also subscribe to. Let's not spend all our time worrying about the problem. Let's think about what's the solution. Yeah. So why do you think that's such a necessary aspect of people that are in leadership roles that want to develop these career conversations, want to build capability?
Yeah, simply because it works. It works, Julian. In a number of years in consulting and running companies, a solution focus is one of the most powerful things that I can think of, and it's powerful, as I said earlier, because it is simple. You don't. It's the old story, of the engineers seeing the steam train coming down the track and saying, "Well, that's all very well in practice, but will it work in theory?" Yeah. So, with solution focus, we're not concerned about why it's working. We're just concerned that it is, and understanding, and then when we do find out what works, doing more of it. So it's just one of the most powerful, and it's really a communication tool. It's the way in which we talk about things, because problems aren't things. They're not cups and saucers or tables and chairs. Problems are socially constructed by the way in which we talk about things. So if we could change the way we talk about something, then we can change the way that we think about something, and not see problems as blocks, but simply ways in which we've yet to ascribe a solution. And if something really is unsolvable, an unsolvable problem, that's all we've got money for the till is unsolvable problems. But if something turned out to be unsolvable, then give it to the unsolvable problem team. Yeah. Every company's got one, give it to them, because we've only going to be concerned about solvable problems. And I think one of the things I've seen, gosh, I can't tell you how many meetings I've been in where groups of managers have sat around talking about a problem. The more they talk about it, the bigger and bigger and bigger the problem gets, till everyone gets exhausted and overwhelmed by it. So, oh gosh, there's no answers here. So it's about breaking that cycle of our thinking and thinking differently. And sometimes too, we tend to think about things in terms of, when asked, what do we want? Answering with what we don't want. Is that, well, I don't know what I want, but I can tell you what I don't want. But that's not actually very helpful. Yeah. It's not very helpful at all. So if I went into a supermarket with a shopping list of what I didn't want, a funny old shopping basket I'd end up with. Yeah. So it's really about looking for what's working. We're not looking for wrong and right. We're looking for good and better. And we want to know what people are doing when things are better. I was once consulting to an organisation that had taken over part of a public sector service provider, and the company that took them over, they had some technology they wanted. The company that took them over were quite entrepreneurial and fast on their feet, and this group that they acquired were not as nimble that they were used to, and they were the managing director was quite upset about it because they felt that it was affecting the performance of their organisation. So I sat and listened to this person, the chief executive, tell me about this problem with the two groups and the problems, and probably after about the first 10 minutes I had the gist, but I let the person tell their story for about 45 minutes, and then I just asked one simple question at the end of the 45 minutes was, well, where is it working? Where is it working? So exceptions are really important. And the answer in this case was, well, it's not working anywhere. So you just keep pushing, keep delving. Well, there must be somewhere. Till finally we kept drilling and we kept peeling the onion. We finally found a team in the back corner was working. So we spent our time looking at what was going on with them. Why was it working there? What was going on? What were they doing to find the answer everywhere else? But it completely changed the conversation from being completely downcast and dispirited to being energised. And suddenly we'd seen a glimpse of the solution, but it was disguised as something else.
You talk about this idea of reframing problem-focused language.
Yeah.
And I'm familiar with reframing, but I think it's important that you share with the listeners what you're thinking around this idea of reframing problem-focused language.
Yes. Well, it's reframing, again, as part of the solution-focused practitioner's toolkit, a really valuable part of it as well. and really shows the power of words just when we reframe a problem-focused matter into a solution-focused matter. For instance, if you're working with someone and they said, well, I just don't like working with Julian.
How could that be?
How could that be? I know. Couldn't possibly be, but how could that be? Then you could say, well, I could say, as your boss, Julian, I could say, well, that's terrible. What's wrong with Julian? Which is a typical problem-focused question, because then the other person then goes into a diatribe of what they think about Julian, and then we all feel lousy, and poor old Julian's not even in the mix. Or I could ask a solution-focused question that will change the nature of that conversation, and which could be something as simple as, so you want to get on with Julian? It might sound very simple, but it is simple. But simple doesn't always necessarily mean easy either. But by simply saying, do you want to get, if they say no, well, then that's a different conversation now. But, more than likely to say, well, yes, of course I want to get on with Julian. What are you, mad? Well, okay, then what's stopping you from doing that? Oh, bang, bang. Well, what can we do about that? Well, I don't like the way he cuts his hair. Well, we're not going to do anything about that, are we? So push that out. So immediately you get off the list. So what it will do is channel you into a more helpful place where things can get actually done rather than not done, rather than getting all tied up in what might be the perceived problem. So that's just one example that comes to mind. But often does come up. It's just about changing the way in which we see something and changing our language so it's more helpful. So where we're trying to get to is not wrong or right, it's just good and better. And what's happening when things are better. So another way you might say is, well, look, tell me about a time. Another way you might address that would be, well, tell me about a time when you really do get on with Julian. Oh, yeah, well, that's when, we're out, we're working on a project together and we're both collaborating. Okay, so tell me in detail about that. I don't want to, I don't want to hear about the other, about when it's not. Just tell me about what's going on when it is working. It's most incredibly powerful. I use this with my teenage children when almost nothing else works. It's a fantastic thing. And the power of words. Absolute power of words. It does take practice. It's really simple. It's actually easy to use, and it just takes practice. And the more you practice it, the better you'll get.
So talk to me about the GROW model. Yeah. It's one that we use, we teach, we train. So whenever I come across someone else who's using it, I'm always looking for insight into how you use it and views on it. So Let's talk about GROW.
Well, I love GROW. I just love it. I've worked with the GROW model now for many, many years. I've tried to find other models that do it better, but frankly, I haven't. If you have models, Julian, that you believe do, I'd love to hear about it. I just think the GROW model is such, again, a very simple model, but it works. And when I've been working with groups and when we've been running workshops about helping people structure conversations, I've found the GROW model very quickly shows how quickly people can learn how to have much better constructive conversations using the GROW model than just about everything else. So there's a bit of efficiency around it. It's kind of just gets to the quick of the matter and gets to the outputs a lot more quicker. But it also seems to give the people I've worked with a lot of confidence in being able to structure the conversation. So rather than just going off and we don't know where it's going, that at least they've got a framework to follow. So, which is, as you know, starts with goals, and then and making them SMART goals. And you might have 2 or 3 goals, and before you rest on your final 1 or 3 or whatever it is, and then testing for the reality. What's really going on. What do you think could be happening there, so that then you can frame out the options that might flow from that. And then in a wrap-up session. So in the options area, that's where I like to use brainstorming and saying, okay, well, we've set our goals. We kind of got a good understanding of what's happening around us, and now we can get into the fun part, which is about brainstorming and how we're going to make this happen. And then the wrap up, where if it's in a coaching scenario, particularly, is where both parties might make commitments, and particularly if it's the leader, it's the important time to actually follow through on your commitment. So if you're going to say you're going to do something at the end of that meeting, it's really critical that you actually do it. And then, of course, you've got regrow, which is reviewing. The next conversation is starting by reviewing what you did in the last grow session. Really, really simple model, but works absolutely beautiful, and I can highly recommend it to anyone thinking about structuring any sort of coaching scenario, and particularly career coaching.
Well, it's so flexible, isn't it? Because you can use it, the way we train it is you can use it for development coaching session, so someone's career focused, or you can use it for performance. So if someone's not performing, we're so flexible.
Very well said, Julian. I agree entirely.
In Chapter 11, you talk about the need for people to lead a career conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that such an important aspect of leadership, and why do they need to do it?
Well, I think the first point is I think just being able to open up a career conversation. Not everyone's going to necessarily be pounding your door down as their leader and saying, I want to have a career conversation with you. In fact, they may be quite reticent to do that. So as a leader, as I said earlier, right at the beginning, it's a great opportunity to engage and develop trust and rapport and that sort of connection where, if there are headhunters pounding on there, ringing them mercilessly, come to us kind of thing, they may be more likely to share with you what's going on if you've actually got that sort of connection. So it's about making it easy in the first instance for individuals to engage with you, that you've got a confidential environment, and that you can trust them with the information. I think that the word trust is the operative one. It's trust is, in my mind, the great enabler of learning. So the problem is when there's no trust in an organisation, people hold the information in because they're concerned. They're concerned about what might be done with it. Oh, I'm not going to pass. I just learned something, but I don't know that I'll share that because I'm not sure what's going to happen. So they tend to hold it in. And the problem is with that, the organisation and individuals keep making the same mistakes over and over and over. No one's learning. So it is the great enabler of learning, and building a trusted workplace is absolutely crucial. So being able to kickstart the conversations is really important. When I talk about leading it, it's everything from being able to create the environment for it to happen in, which is understanding the ethics and protocols, and then some basic rudiments around how can I open that conversation, through to then, well, now I've got the conversation going, what do I do with it? Where do I take it? And I really like a narrative approach. Look, I'm across most of the career assessments out there, and they're all good. They all have their role to play. But the one that's most effective that I've found over many, many years is a narrative approach where the individual's just telling their story. And your job as the leader is to help them tell it. It's their story. And by doing that, what you can do is by asking the right questions, you can help lead them to the right answers around perhaps transition points they hadn't recognised, or perhaps people in their past that have helped them that they hadn't quite realised that they'd helped them, or events that have helped them. So as their leader, it's a great opportunity to help them see what the key transition points are and how that could help them moving forward. To do that, you've got to ask the right questions and let them tell their story. And the narrative approach takes longer. It's not like a 10-minute, fill in the boxes thing. It takes longer, but it's incredibly powerful. You'll learn so much from each other through the process. And it's, by and large, it's fairly enjoyable.
You write about the importance of ethics and protocols when it comes to career development. So why is that such an important aspect?
Well, it's absolutely critical. It's, as far as any aspect of coaching goes, in this context, we're talking about careers. But critical to any aspect of coaching. I think in the case of ethics, in the first instance, it's about knowing that ethical dilemmas will arise. If you're coaching or you're in leadership or having career conversations, it's almost guaranteed you're going to trip across your fair share of ethical dilemmas. And knowing that there's sometimes no easy answers to those, that they're not black and white, they rarely are black and white. And what I find is, in the first instance, is just to recognise it, to know they exist, not to be perplexed if the answer's not immediately available. And where I find the answers are often found when you hit one of those, first step, go back to your own values. Just go to your value set and see what that tells you about what to do. You'll probably find the answer there, in my experience. The other aspect is where mentors come in. Now, mentors are a great way to if you hit an ethical dilemma, without breaching confidentiality, you can go to your mentor and talk about a particular situation and see if they've hit this before and see what advice. So mentors can be a really, really great way to when you hit a tricky situation. But what I'd say is don't get perplexed by it. Don't feel in any way inadequate. If you hit something you don't know the answer, join the club. We've all been there. And unless you're hitting your fair share of ethical dilemmas, you're probably not doing too much coaching. So just know they exist. The one thing I would say, though, is not to dabble in anything that even looks like therapy. So if someone needs therapy, they're in the wrong room. They need to be, if you suspect that, then refer them on to the appropriate professional. Most organisations have an employee assistance program, EAP program, or perhaps you might be referring them to a GP. So, but if you're concerned about therapy, make sure you refer them to the right person. So they would be the two things I'd say about ethics. And then the other aspect is around engagement protocols, which is more around the logistics of how you set up the conversation and some of the hygiene issues that you want to have sit around it.
You encourage people to have a written career plan. I would have to, and this is a hunch, take your word for that. I reckon that of all the leaders I've trained over the years, I don't even think there would be double digits that could reach into their back pocket or their laptop and say, here's my written career plan. Why do you suggest it's such an important thing to do?
Well, and many people have been very successful, either having something on the back of an envelope or perhaps just in their head. But my argument would be it's not coaching unless it's written down. That's really the foundation of what I've got to say about it. And I think the discipline of doing that, look, I'm not a great, sometimes I have to make myself write plans as well, even when I know that they're good for me.
Yeah.
But it is worthwhile, the sheer evidence of what happens when you do it. And when I write a plan, I usually get to where I'm going, and when I don't, I usually don't. So it's really about reward and effort for me. And but I think writing the career plan, writing any plan, but in this case a career plan, makes you think about all the key areas, whether it's about self-insight or it's about how I'm going to market myself, how I'm going to promote myself. And you can think through and dive back into your SWOT analysis as well and cross back to those inputs to see, what's going to affect your plan, how you might execute it. So, but it's most fundamental if it's not coaching unless it's written down. And then you've got a document you can refer to and then refer back to it. And I'd say refer to it regularly. It's pretty hard to do that when it's just in your head. Yeah. And your head gets, if you're like me, my head gets scrambled a lot of the times. So I like to have stuff written down. I can see it and say, oh, yeah, well, the goalposts have moved, so I need to adjust my goals because they're not going to be realistic. They were realistic 12 months ago. They're not realistic now. I need to make some fine-tuning. And I think it just enables you to do that much more clearly. And I think, if you were a leader in a business, this is the perhaps the irony to your point, Julian, is if you're a leader, if you were perhaps a manager in a business and you just got a new chief executive. The chief executive came in to meet you and said, "Oh, hello, Julian. It's nice to meet you. I'm your new CEO. Can you show me your plan?" And you said, "Well, well, I haven't got one. I just make it up as I go." You kind of, the chief executive, you wouldn't blame them for feeling a bit,
absolutely.
How comfortable do I feel about this person? And yet, for some reason, when we think about career plans, we think that seems to be okay. So I think it's just about changing our thinking around it, reframing for success, rebating for solutions, because we know that we're thinking about what works. We know that writing career plans work. They don't have to be some beautiful piece of prose. It can be dot points. It can be whatever's meaningful for you, but it does need to get written down.
Are there any books or people that inspire you?
Yeah, well, predictably, I've spoken a lot today about solution focus. So Paul Jackson and Mark McCurgra's The Solution Focus is a terrific book for if you're looking to understand what solution focus is about. That's just a terrific book. As is Jane Green and Anthony Grant's Solution Focus Coaching, where they've applied it to that as well, or indeed my own. Another book which is a bit dated now, but I love it, is Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point.
Okay.
Absolutely fascinating book. It's all about systems theory, and yet you won't see that mentioned anywhere in the 200 pages. But it's a terrific book, and Daniel Pink's Drive. Another one is Patrick Lencioni's The Advantage. I really like Patrick Lencioni and the way that he thinks about teams and his pillars. So I really I love his work, and really well worth reading.
Okay. So if people want to find out more about you, they might be interested in engaging you or hearing what you've got to say a bit further, where should they go?
Okay, so if you want to know just a bit about me in an overview sense, go to my LinkedIn profile. I've spent a bit of time trying to make that really encapsulate what I'm all about, that you get not just what I've done, but actually the spirit of what I believe in and what I try to do. Obviously, I can go to Deliver Practice, www.deliverpractice.com.au, and you'll find plenty about career conversations and me there. And or just Google me. There's been quite a number of papers published and what have you. So if you Google me, you'll find me in around the millions of pages of Google with various articles around what I like to think of in this way.
Okay. Any last words on leadership and career conversations?
Last words. Look, Julian, I think it's just about talking to your people. I think if you're a leader, just talk to your people. It's easy, and I know I've been a chief executive. I know when you're busy and you've got strategy and competitors and board papers and all the other stuff going on, and particularly when you hit some glitches, where it's easy to prioritise connecting with your people down the line, push it down the line. But it's the one thing I'd really recommend that you don't, because it might be the conversation that you say, "I haven't got time, sorry Julian, I can't do that today," and then tomorrow you've got a resignation on your desk. That a half-hour conversation may have taken you down different direction, particularly if that person is really pivotal to your business. And in practice, that's pretty much what happens. And headhunters have got an uncanny knack of finding people's pain points, particularly the talented ones in the organisation, and they'll needle them and until they can get them interested to come over to their side of the equation. So, it's really about making sure that you prioritise it, and that if something's got to suffer, that's not one of them. And I just don't think, in moving forward with the pace at which technology is changing the employment landscape, I just don't think leaders can afford to not do it. So for leaders who have perhaps got by with subpar soft skills, I don't think that's going to be possible moving forward. I think looking at where that's going, as a leader, you're going to really need to have a strong capability in the suite of soft skills. And so if that's not perhaps your strong suit today, then it'd be a good time to start developing them. And they can be developed either through coaching or mentoring or other means. So they'd be the key aspects. And I think that just talk to your people. I think your employees are going to thank you for it. You're going to be a better leader for it, and your organisation is going to be more successful. So, everyone's a winner. I just can't see why you wouldn't. And it's a fantastic opportunity. As much as the technology is making changes, and for some, it will mean changing jobs or more particularly careers. There's some fantastic opportunities. I couldn't think of a more exciting time to be in business than right now.
Absolutely agree. On that note, thank you so much, Greg, for being part of the Synergy Leadership Podcast. All the best.
Thank you very much, Julie. It's been great to be with you.
Well, that wraps up episode 93 of the Synergy Leadership Podcast. Another great author interview episode for you. I would like to encourage you to head on over to the Synergy Group website, engage in the conversation with us. Tell us what you liked about the episode. Tell us who you'd like us to interview, or tell us what sort of content you'd like us to deliver to. And if you are an iPhone user, please feel free, head on over to the Apple site and leave us a review. It really does help us build awareness of the podcast. In next week's episode, another great curriculum ecosystem episode for you, where I introduce a model called the Johari window. It's another great episode. Until then, love to hear what you think. Happy listening.